from Czechia. So I have a little group who are live. Good. So we had some very good points from the groups about the benefits of remembering impermanence and, keeping it as an object of familiarization as often as possible. So yeah, I mean, it's we have to make the best of our visit here in this it's very short time. So there's no time to waste. And I liked that one about, transformability. When you think about conditioned phenomena, not just impermanent itself, giving the sense of everything fading away, going downhill, but, the conditioned phenomena gives a sense of, everything is transformable, dynamic, just like the energy of Tara, who I'm sure you practice there in Leeds Center. So a change means a lot of positive things, that things can be, steered in the right direction if you collect the right causes and conditions, which is exactly what Gen Lamrimpa is saying in the first part of his book. And so all our petty moods, all our petty emotions, when we get terribly upset by something that somebody has done to us, or we have a rage, temper tantrum, these things are very tiring, so if we can remember impermanence to say, there's no time to waste on these petty emotions. We have to deal with situations without getting too, involved in our own emotional reactions. If we think about impermanence, then, we have to think about life's too important to spend too much time on indulging in those, exaggerated emotions, things like that, And I remember when I first went to Dharamsala in the 90s, the early 1990, 1991, I was really surprised by how cheerful and, happy and welcoming of strangers that the Tibetan community were. They'd been thrown out of their country. They were refugees in a foreign land. A lot of them were just living in little shacks at that time, little temporary homes. But they were so cheerful. It was kind of a revelation to me, coming from England, where everybody is so serious and straight-faced, So to see these Tibetans who had so little in the way of, comforts and possessions, just being very joyful and happy. So that was a good lesson for me. It was very surprising to me. Yeah. So in spite of your difficulties, you see, you just enjoy what you've got, not worry about what you've lost. So this is sort of to do with a recollection of impermanence. Anyway, so we can move on from there. So yes, unless anybody's got any questions, please, just after lunch is a good time for bringing a point up if you want to ask. Anybody wishes to say, have a question. Yeah, so...
I had a question.
Yes.
Sorry, this is Jenny.
Jenny, yeah.
I was wondering, in some traditional places, like Thailand, for example, they talk about the 3 marks of conditioned existence, and Nirvana is peace tends to be left out, and it's sort of anatta, anicca, dukkha, or not necessarily in that order. So I wondered if you could say something about that.
Well, it's something I've noticed myself too. And there is one sutra, what's it called? I wrote the name down somewhere. One sutra, so this will be from the Sanskrit tradition. Questions of King Sagara Sutra. Is that what it was called? I think so. Questions of King Sagara Sutra. So in that you've got the 4 seals. That's not the only sutra in which the 4 seals are mentioned, but that's one that somebody gave as a, it's just talks about the Four Seals in a fairly condensed way. So that is in our tradition, in the sense it's in the Sanskrit canon. So that's where people from our side of Buddhism will be getting their ideas from. So there you've got 4, Nirvana is peace is included. But yes, in the Pali canon, you tend to have 3 marks of existence, don't you? Impermanence, suffering, and selflessness. Which is enough. When we come on to selflessness, when we come on to Nirvana tomorrow, there are differences in how Nirvana is viewed, you see, between the different Buddhist traditions. So maybe we shouldn't talk about that right now, but it's we can bring it up tomorrow. How Nirvana is viewed, you see. So whether what kind of status you have once you're in Nirvana, are you still a person, sort of thing? You know, we in our tradition tend to think of, you know, it's possible to get to Nirvana and you're still a person. Even in Nirvana, you still reach Nirvana, but you may not have a body, you may not have contaminated, suffering body, but your mind is there meditating on emptiness. So you're still a person in the sense there's a mind and a mind stream. Whereas somebody from another tradition, like these traditions, I'm not saying the Pali tradition, but individual liberation type practitioners who are not in the great vehicle tradition of Tibet, they tend to be much more well, I don't know, I don't want to make a critical remark saying that they're more vague or something, but they're less inclined to say that the person is identifiable after the boundary of Nirvana. Once you cross the boundary into Nirvana, is there any point even talking about being a person anymore? They might have a question about that, you see. So they have, you know, once you're in Nirvana, there's very little you can say. So it's not like a person is experiencing peace in Nirvana in the same way as we might hear about in our tradition. So yes, we can talk about that tomorrow. Yeah, but that is a point. Yes, that the first 3 of the 4 points here are kind of, you know, more often mentioned in the Pali tradition, perhaps, than the 4 that we've got hold of. But we have a scriptural source for those. And Questions of King Sagar Sutra, you can find that one. And you'll get a sort of a sutra source for the 4. Yes, good, thank you. So the first part of the text, as I've said, Gen Lamrimpa is talking about compounded things and how you make cause and effect work in your favor when you're practicing the path, basically. So that's a couple of people, you know, who I gave the text to look at and shared the text with. They came to me and said they found that first part of the text very helpful. They found it very useful and, you know, a good, clear presentation of one aspect of cause and effect. So it was pleasing to at least some people to be able to read that and helpful. Yeah, and there's some sensible points that he makes, but maybe we don't need to go into those now because we want to get onto, as I said, more deeply into impermanence. So I'm going to leave those that earlier part of the text for you to read. You're on your own. That's one of the. It's not too. That's a fairly straightforward part of the text. But then you get brief mentions of talking about more specialized aspects of the path, which do need more thought, especially, you know, things like past and future lives may not be so familiar to Westerners. I mean, he doesn't say much, but you can see how he's trying to be inclusive. And then karma, and its effects, and liberation and omniscience, how to, what's the thinking behind, the reasoning behind, the existence of those. But again, liberation and omniscience, that comes up again in the Nirvana section, you see. So we'll come back to that. And some advice about practice, how to practice the path properly. And then he goes on to, the second of the two sections of the first seal, which is actually on impermanence. So he doesn't say much about manifest type of impermanence. He says something, because he divides impermanence in different ways. And one of the ways we divide impermanence is into this manifest type of impermanence, which we were thinking about, and which this meditation on death and impermanence is about. That's about the manifest side of impermanence. And then there's a subtle impermanence, you see. So that's where he spends a bit more time trying to, kind of get down to a more subtle level. But he uses quite a few different arguments, which, if you've got some background in the debating and philosophical side of Buddhism, you find it readable. But if you haven't got that kind of background, then some of the things he's saying you might find a bit tricky. So as I say, I'm not going to go through the text very much, but I'll just try to give you, let's just like try to sort of lead ourselves in towards this subtle impermanence business, which is, kind of where people might kind of benefit from knowing about and, need some guidance about thinking about. It's not in the Lamrim, you see. The Lamrim will give you a meditation on impermanence and death, such as we're going to do. But subtle impermanence isn't really sort of mentioned there. But it's, it is a great help in sort of moving towards meditation and emptiness. So it's really interesting in itself and very useful. Deepening our appreciation of impermanence is, very much helpful on the path and in practical ordinary life. When we get to the Nirvana section, then I will go a bit more closely to the text. So we'll have a little bit more of a taste of, what it is actually like to read this text when we get onto tomorrow's section. So I will be trying to go through the sections that he's organized, Gen Lamrimpa, but not so much today, just because better to get down to the main point. Right, I don't know, is everybody feeling sleepy after lunch, or we've had a little rest because the lunch hour was quite generous, 2 hours long, so it wasn't as if we've just had to have a big meal and rush back to our computers. So if you're not feeling too dozy, then why don't we try this meditation on death and impermanence, which is the 9-round meditation. 9 rounds death and impermanence meditation, which I have sent you I think Lynn sent you earlier, and it's also on the chat.
Geshe Losel, before we move on to the meditation, I think Laura was trying to ask you a question.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, don't worry. It can wait. It can wait. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's go into meditation. Yeah, okay. I can ask it later. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
That's up to you, yeah. So it's called 9-round death meditation. How to meditate on the mindfulness of death. So as I say, this is in the Lamrim. Where does it come in the Lamrim? Thomas, where does it come in the Lamrim?
In the small scope, volume 1, is it, I think?
Well, if it was Tsongkhapa's 3-volume great treatise on the stages of the path, it will be in the first volume here. So what comes before that then? What's the lead into it?
Reliance on a teacher? Oh, sorry.
Say lie. Yeah. So reliance on the guru. Then.
Yes, that's not the first. That's not the directly preceding one. That is before, but
Oh, is it karma?
Perfect human rebirth, I think. Perfect.
yes, Tim.
Is it the precious human life?
Yes, yes. So that's the broadly speaking the pattern of the Lamrim, which is the stages of the path to enlightenment, from the sort of the meditator's point of view, practitioner who's not so this isn't a text which concentrates on the philosophy, but on the practical meditations which you should be trying to make part of your daily cycle of regular meditations if you are practicing in the tradition of Dalai Lama, so on. So yes, the text is very much about respect and devotion to the Guru in the beginning. That's more or less one of the first sections. And then you get the precious human rebirth. So that's the very brightening and sort of uplifting kind of sort of meditation. It's what a wonderful opportunity we have got in this life, how rare it is, and how special it is. And that we're just comparing ourselves to the animals. We can see we've got something they haven't, some kind of self-awareness. So that's a really, the chance for us to work on bringing out our Buddha nature. It's a chance for us to make progress. So that's really, really marvelous. And then if you think of the whole spectrum of suffering and happiness in the world, not just the ones that the animals are experiencing on this planet, but the whole spectrum of happiness and suffering that there must be in a universe as big as ours. There must be everything from the most serious, deepest, awful suffering up to the brightest, most beautiful happiness within samsara. I'm not talking about nirvana or getting out of suffering, but within the round of samsara. So if you think about the whole spectrum, from the very worst of suffering, which you can say hellish suffering, hell being suffering, and all the way around the clock until the happiness of those beings who they don't even have bodies anymore. They just are meditating in a sort of formless realm, still in cyclic existence, still subject to birth and death and rebirth, but their lives are very much longer than ours. Thousands of years long by our measurement. And as I say, they don't even have gross bodies anymore. They've gone beyond having to be reborn in a clumsy body like this. So their minds are in a fine state of concentration on whatever, endless space or endless consciousness or something. I'm not saying that's a fortunate rebirth in the sense that it's a good place to do Buddhism. It's not necessarily a good place to get out of suffering, because you're in such a state of neutrality or a state of comfort or a state of happiness that you don't bother to think about the faults of cyclic existence because you're having such a good time. I don't mean just a good time in the sense of happy, jolly, having parties like the desire of gods and having sensuous experiences and drinking special, immortal nectar and stuff like that. But the people who've gone beyond the fluctuations of happiness and desire, to the state of perfect concentration and sort of spacing out, we could call it. So they can't come down and start analysing. Well, why is there suffering in cyclic existence? So they're not as fortunate as we are. They don't have as fortunate as rebirth as we do, but they're in this state of calmness and solitude and equanimity and so on. So it's kind of one of the higher planes of existence in samsara, you see. So given all that kind of, given all those possibilities on the spectrum, from highest, deepest suffering to highest happiness in samsara, so we are very fortunate. So we do have, the mental capacity, and we do have the ability to enjoy ourselves and relax if we have, the right karma. And, the precious human rebirth means meeting up with the teachings, meeting up with the Buddhas. It's not just being born human. It is being born human and having some resources or some, good connections so that we meet up with the Buddha's teachings once more and get on with it. But we do have suffering. We do see suffering. We do experience it so that we kind of pushed into doing something about it. We do have these sensitive nerves, so it does make us, we want to get on with understanding the path. We don't just laze around and not bother because we are kind of comfortable. At least, that's how it should be. So that's why we need the meditation on the precious human rebirth, saying, don't waste this precious opportunity. So that's lifting us up, inspiring the mind, saying, oh, wonderful chance. We feel really, sort of positive about that, positive energy. But then, after your precious human meditation on your precious human rebirth, you have to meditate on death and impermanence. You see, your precious human death. Nobody calls it a precious human death, do they? Only me. Precious human tea break. So, death and impermanence. So that's, to sober us up. Yeah. Again, another way of stopping us wasting our opportunity in this life, and stopping us just indulging in, the possibilities of samsara, but saying yes, but there's more to it than that, and there's to really get down to the, cause why we're suffering at all, and really doing something radical about removing our suffering. Then we need to, really push ourselves and get concentrated and, mindful of studying the teachings and not wasting our time. So this is what this meditation is supposed to do. So we should try it. Okay, well, we'll spend a couple of minutes just in calm meditation, just breathing meditation. And then we'll start with the analytical meditation, thinking about these 9 different points. 3 main points, and each point has 3 sort of secondary points. But let's just do some simple breathing meditation with straight back. And then spend, I don't know, about 20 minutes on this meditation. So first stage then is to set a good motivation. So the motivation is from Shantideva. So it's chapter 8, verse number 95. Since I and other beings both, in wanting happiness, are equal and alike, what difference is there to distinguish us, that I should strive to have my bliss alone? So our motivation isn't just for our own fulfillment, but we're all just equal. We're all just brothers and sisters ourselves, other species, other creatures of other realms. So we should strive, if we're striving for one person's happiness, we should strive for all. We all have the same need. We all have the same, types of suffering. Verse number 108, chapter 8, 108. The ocean-like immensity of joy arising when all beings will be freed. Will not this be enough? Will not this satisfy? The wish for my own freedom, what is that to me? So I might have my own, I might gain, I might achieve my own, solitary freedom, my own solitary nirvana, but it is better to strive for the ocean of joy, the ocean of happiness, when all beings are freed. So won't that be more satisfying? Won't that be satisfying enough for me to have helped all beings to find, freedom and happiness? So let me do my little meditation with that in mind. So death will certainly come. Death is certain. First point. First main point, death is certain. Second main point, time of death is uncertain. Third main point, at the time of death, nothing helps except Dharma practice. So going back to the first main point, death is certain. So that's the first sort of the first of the secondary points, just saying, yes, death will certainly come, cannot be avoided. Who can you think who hasn't died? Even the Buddha had to die. So whenever we come across a dead insect or a dead animal, like I saw a dead fox in the forest the other day, long dead, it was by one of these hunting towers where people wait to shoot the wild pigs and the deer. But somebody had seemed to have shot this little fox, and its body was almost disappeared back into the earth, but still its head was showing. So we have to think like that. That it's only for a while that this body jumps and dances around. The time is coming when it too will go back to the earth, be released as smoke in the sky from the cremation fire. So this body that we have gives us its life, very temporary arrangement, soon to be terminated. Secondary point number 2. One's lifespan cannot be extended and constantly diminishes. So we are only going one way. Nobody is getting younger. Nobody goes back to being nearer to where they were born, nearer to their, nobody gets younger. Nobody goes back nearer to their birth. No, it's just a one-way train. The other way. And the train's always moving. We don't know when it's going to get to the destination, but certainly it is nearing the destination. Week by week, day by day, hour by hour. Life is sinking away. How many beings are dying around us right now in our little area, our little district? All different types of creatures. Secondary point number 3. While you are alive, there is little time for Dharma practice. So even while we still have life, Dharma practice is difficult to find time for, I mean. So life hurries along. There's no putting the more important things off because we are too busy, because there is so little time anyway. After we have done the practical things of life, we have to find that time for Dharma practice. So death is certain, therefore we should practice the teachings and make that the main point. Determine that we shall do that. The time of death is uncertain. Second main point. So lifespan in our world is uncertain. In other words, maybe that people have a fixed lifespan. But that really absolutely is not the case with us. Our passing away can come at any time. Secondary point number 2. There are many causes of death and few that sustain life. So we are such complicated organisms that there are so many ways in which our body can fail us. And even if we are still alive, we might be so badly affected by contrary conditions of mental illness or dementia or deprivation that it's as good as if we were dead, in a sense. No chance to practice the Dharma. Death by fire, death by earth, there's some damaging of our body by strong, hard materials. Death by water, drowning. Death by air, if the air becomes polluted through smoke or something like that. So many ways in which there's so many diseases which the body can finds impossible to deal with. So life is really like walking on a tightrope. Subsidiary point number 3. Yes, and the body is extremely fragile. So complicated, so easily disrupted. And compared to the forces in this world of natural disasters and violence and so forth, our body is very hard to protect. Quite weak. So that was the second point. Time of death is uncertain. So you have to decide that, yes, you will practice the Dharma and you will practice it now. There is no other time. Now is the only time you've got. And main point number 3, at the time of death, nothing helps except Dharma practice. So what happens when we do die then? What is going to be of benefit? Number 1, friends won't help. They can help up until the time of death. But as death comes nearer and nearer, then there is little and less that they can do. And then when you cross the dividing line, then you're pretty much alone. Number 2, all your resources, all your money that you've saved up, all the comforts you've arranged for yourself in this life, and your nice house and servants or whatever you've got, you know, they're nothing when it comes to when you've died. And finally, of course, even your body, even this body that you've been taking care of so long. What use is that? You know, you're parted from your body. It can't help you anymore. So whatever you do for your body now, it'll be nothing. Death. So the only thing that's going to help you is your Dharma practice. So let's make a strong resolution. We will practice the Dharma. We'll practice it now, and we'll practice it purely. Never mind the obstacles, we will find some way of practicing Dharma. Turning the obstacles we meet into the Dharma path somehow. So as with our motivation, as with our little private personal dedication, we send our energy out so that, we are steering the energy, the good energy of our meditation towards enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. Thank you. We'll have to stop there. So if we can make some kind of practice of death and impermanence meditation part of our daily practice, that's excellent. Maybe that's a bit long to do, every day, or people are busy, but something similar is very, to familiarize to the point where it becomes natural to think like that. That's really what we have to aim at. You can see, though, that is, everybody knows we've all got to die. We may forget about it, and that's very dangerous. But it's not something we need to really be kind of, shown, taught. Of course, that's part of a good Dharma teacher's work, to make sure that people are reminded of those things. But still, this kind of impermanence, when the body stops working, or the kind of impermanence when your car stops working, or you drop a dish and it smashes on the kitchen floor, that's a kind of very obvious kind of impermanence. So you don't really need anything except, to recollect what your senses are showing to you, to be mindful of that kind of impermanence. But when we get down to subtle impermanence, a little bit different. After all, what is the difference between subtle impermanence and this manifest or gross impermanence that we've just been talking about? Would anybody like to say what they think the difference is? Radek.
Subtle is maybe a bit more hidden. We need to get at it through maybe reasoning. It's not manifest phenomena.
Yeah, that's the main point, glad you haven't forgotten everything we did in those debate sessions, Radek. Fantastic.
Oh, no. Basics, I remember, Geshe, just basics.
Yeah, so subtle impermanence and the manifest impermanence, or gross impermanence, what's the difference? The subtle impermanence is one that you won't just get at just by using your ordinary, 5 senses. It's not like the pot smashing on the floor and becoming broken bits. Subtle impermanence is the impermanence which is below the level of that, the power of our ordinary sense powers to see, our sense consciousnesses. In the end, we can see impermanence directly, but that's an advanced realization. Somebody who can see emptiness directly, a direct mental concentration, then they can also see subtle impermanence directly. But that's advanced. We're talking, yogic direct perceiver. Those of you who have done some study of Buddhist awareness and knowledge, Buddhist psychology, a yogic direct perceiver. But for our ordinary persons, direct perceivers, their sense consciousnesses, it's below the level of which they can pick up. So at that point, how do we realize there is a subtler level of impermanence going on? Well, we're going to need to use reasoning. So this is the challenge. And this is where it becomes a little bit more, there's a little bit more to think about, a bit more of a challenge. But I think, you can make sense of the examples that are given and so forth. I'm not saying it's all so complicated. Emptiness is much more complicated to understand. But it's, the person who understands the 4 seals, if you remember, they're a holder of Buddhist tenets. If you remember in the document that was kind of, advertising this course, a Buddhist is somebody who just goes for refuge. So that could be somebody who's illiterate, somebody who's got great faith, or somebody who's, not an educated person. Like many people in Tibet would just sort of call themselves simple followers of faith, who wouldn't have a great deal of knowledge about, what Buddhism is about. They just have great faith in the Dalai Lama, and their sons or daughters who went to nunneries and monasteries, they could find out things. They could learn about what Buddhism was, but the people remaining in the villages would just have a very simple idea. So there would be people going for refuge, and they would be Buddhist. But somebody who's going to be a holder of Buddhist tenets, like some sense of Buddhist philosophy, then they have to be able to explain these four principles that we're talking about now. And you're going to have to use a bit more understanding, aren't you? A bit more sort of reasoning. Just a simple example, like if you see fire in front of you, or you feel the heat of fire, or your oven or something, that's a direct perception of fire. But then when we're walking in the hills, or we're looking across at a big forest, then we can see smoke arising out of the forest. Or we can see smoke arising from the top of a hill. Looking upwards at the hill, we can see smoke arising. So this is a sign, this is a reason telling us that there is a fire there. Somebody's lit a big fire in the woods. So there is smoke arising through the trees. We can't see the fire. We can't, feel the heat of the fire. But still we know completely that there is a fire there, because we can see this authentic, smoke arising through the trees or from the top of the hill. So that's what I mean by, you're getting at a phenomena through reasoning. Normally fire is an obvious, manifest phenomena that we don't need reasoning to experience. But if it is far away, if it is hidden behind some other obstacle, then it becomes hidden for us, and then we have to use reasoning to get at it. So that's what I mean by using reasoning to understand something. So what are we trying to understand? Well, we're trying to understand this subtle impermanence. I mean, what do we mean by that? Well, if we take something like a cup, something like a piece of steel, like in your kitchen, you can find it like your kitchen knife, for instance. It's made very hard so that it will cut a lot of things without, having to be sharpened. So that kind of material, like a piece of baked clay or a piece of, hard, especially hardened steel. So are they changing all the time? Yes, we can say the knife gets destroyed eventually. It gets snapped, or the blade gets damaged. It gets thrown away, and then if it gets recycled, it gets melted down. Or your pot smashes when you drop it on the floor. So of course there will be the gross impermanence, but is there another level of impermanence more hard to see than that, where the thing is changing all the time? So that's, do you even agree that that's true? Is that how it appears to you? Is that what you believe, let's say? Maybe you have realized it already, I don't know. So Fiona, what do you think? Something like a cup. Is there a subtle level of impermanence going on there, which we can't see with our eyes?
Yes.
And you sound pretty confident. So have you experienced that subtle impermanence of the cup in some way?
No, but it didn't exist at one point, so it's going to not exist at some point in the future. So there's change going on that I can't perceive with my senses at the moment. So I'm inferring there's subtle change going on.
Yeah, well, somebody could say, to be awkward. When you know, when it's just sitting on the kitchen shelf, nobody's using it, you know, it's just sitting in the cupboard, then isn't it just staying the same? It's just sort of becomes static. There's no change going on. Nobody's scratching it or getting it hot or, you know, hitting it against something hard so there's vibrations. It's just sitting on the shelf. So at that time, does it sort of slow down and stop, become a static phenomena?
Well, I know it doesn't, but I'm not really sure why I know it doesn't, to be honest, because there's, you know, there's a mixture of sort of information you get from science and, you know, about atoms and molecules and things moving the whole time, and just because there's a duration of time there as well.
Yeah. So you've got a belief then that it is changing most of the time, if not all of the time. Yeah. And you're basing your belief on what you've heard from other people, and you mentioned the scientists. So you kind of read things in scientific, or you've studied it at school, of course, you know, atoms, molecules. So what have you heard about atoms and molecules? Are they very jumpy things or something?
Yeah, that's about it, really. Yeah, that's as much as I know.
Yeah, that's as far as we go. I mean, I've never studied science at school apart from just, you know, low-level stuff. Yeah, atoms and molecules, they move around a lot. So, that's just a question of believing, isn't it? Belief. And the scientists aren't always right, are they? You know, what becomes scientific truth in one age, you know, a bit further down the line is, oh no, that was all wrong, you know. It's actually like this, you know, they're quite good at changing their minds, which is good, you know, they're healthy, but they are prepared to change their minds, you know. They know that their conclusions they reach are kind of, you know, temporary. They're not rigidly fixed. Well, you know, it depends, doesn't it? Sometimes you get scientists that are very unwilling to change them. They do think that they're right and don't want to be shifted into a new view. But this idea from science is somewhere some suggestion from science about things are in motion, things are in changing, things are going through that. So while you're having a tea break, please, okay, if you had to persuade somebody that things are impermanent at the subtle level, how would you do it? Or if you had to persuade yourself? And that is the second question on that sheet about Saturday questions or whatever it was called. You know, going to subtle impermanence. What makes you think things are actually subtly impermanent? So while you're having a tea break, then you can have a breakout session with yourself or, you know, your friend or something, and just try to come up with some suggestions there. Okay, tea break time, 10 minutes. Back in 10 minutes, please. Kerry says you come back after 20 years. Yeah, or if you come back regularly and over the years, you will notice something has changed. So if you came back every 5 years, or, you know, even if it's a flower that you've got in a vase, you cut a flower out of the garden, you put it in a vase. For a couple of days, it looks good, but then, you know, it starts to droop, or, you know, the leaves start to turn yellow, or something like that. So you watch it. In the morning it's like this, and in the evening is, you know, it has gone down a bit, and then the next morning it's more like that, and then the next evening it's gone a bit like that. You know, the strength has gone out of the stem of the flower, for instance. So from that you can figure to yourself, well, there are these changes every time you look at it over a period of 8 hours. After 8 hours, it's gone like that. So it's kind of suggesting that the change isn't like jumps, you know, it doesn't just jump down into a lower position just because you go out of the room, but it's like gradually like wilting, isn't it? It's gradually losing its strength bit by bit. So that suggests a continual process of change. Yeah, so that's a good one.
Geshe,
Yeah.
I always find it quite useful to think about opposites. So if we would maybe think that things are not changing, moment on moment on a subtle level, then, and we could try to look at the opposite, that we are changing, and that's quite, that's quite extreme in a way.
Yeah, so anytime the thing isn't changing, then it has to be static. So that in Tibetan, in Buddhist language, that means permanent. A phenomenon that's unchanging. Yeah. So that's the alternative. And that's what I was trying to suggest, that something like a rigid, something like a hard structured thing, like a diamond or a piece of a rock from Mount Everest or something, if you just leave it alone, it goes into a permanent state. Then it comes out of its permanent state when you hit it with a hammer, or you put a fire underneath it or something. Yeah, so that's right. You've got to contrast being impermanent with being permanent. Definitely, you think about both sides of the picture. It'll help you to make your mind up. So the Buddhist idea, we haven't got a lot of time to explain now. The idea, you spend time thinking about this when you're doing your Buddhist philosophy studies, when you're studying Dharmakirti, who we mentioned at the beginning of the day. So he's got his reasons, and the idea is that there is a good reasoning for something like pot being impermanent, and that is simply because it is produced. So that's the official Buddhist reasoning. Might not make much sense immediately, but something like a pot, or something a bit easier to realize the impermanence of sound. We often use sound as an example. It is impermanent because it is produced. Produced just means produced from causes and conditions. So that's the argument from the Buddhist side. When you think about it, that as soon as you've got something which is produced from causes and conditions, it is always changing. So they're not just saying anything that is produced will eventually smash or die or become so worn out that it's useless. But the impermanence they're talking about here is this subtle impermanence. It's this steady, never-ending change. And it says, if you think about what it means to be produced, then you can come to the conclusion that things aren't just, temporarily here and are going to break or die or something, but they're actually changing throughout their lives. But, that's how do they get to that conclusion? How do we understand the reason? Produced from causes. But does that really mean that they have to be subtly impermanent? That's a big jump. So, when I studied this stuff in Geshe Studies program, Dharamsala, it's sort of, listening to what they're saying, but, it didn't really make sense to me fully. But Geshe Lamrimpa's text, Gen Lamrimpa's text here, thinking about that, really, it seemed to help a lot for me. And just to sort of try to say briefly why, I can try. I haven't got the words, you have to read Gen Lamrimpa's text quite carefully, and I'm familiar with some of the turns in the road that he takes, you see. But if you're not familiar with that stuff, then you should read my note on page 26, 27. So I've given my ideas, in the footnote. You don't necessarily have to read it now because I'm going to try and explain it. But if you want to read it instead of, at the same time, you're welcome. That's cool. So the point is we're going from something that's manifest, something we can see with our own eyes, and using that to get to something that's hidden, something that is not kind of obvious or clear to our senses. So that's the way all reasonings work, Why is it empty? We can't see it's empty with our eyes. We can't, see it's empty. But it is empty because it's a dependent arising. The subject, me, another person, empty of inherent existence because of being a dependent arising. That's one, very standard reason for realizing emptiness. We can see that something is a dependent arising, at least the obvious levels of dependent arising. And from that, we can get to the hidden phenomena emptiness. Here we can see something that is produced from causes. That's pretty clear, you know, like we can see, we know that if you're going to be born in this world, then you need to be born from parents or something. How could I be here unless my parents have produced me? You know, we're all kind of, we've all seen animals, babies being born. We know what the score is. And if we want to make a pot, you know, we need clay, we need wet clay, we need to shape the clay. Or we need somebody who's got, you know, skill to shape the clay on their wheel, and they put it in the kiln and bake it. So, you know, we want the sound of a trumpet. So somebody has to get the trumpet and take a deep breath and, you know, they have to blow into the trumpet. So things being like the sound of a trumpet being produced from causes, that doesn't really need any reasoning. See, that's the manifest, the obvious thing from which we can go to the less obvious, you know, the hidden phenomena, hopefully. And often when they're using these reasonings, they give you an example to think about. Okay, you know, a pot being impermanent is pretty difficult to understand, you know, to be absolutely have conviction and have real knowledge, you know, not just belief. We're not talking about belief. You know, Fiona believes that her pot is changing all the time. But, you know, actual realization that it is kind of changing all the time in some subtle way, then that's pretty, you know, that's pretty tough one to sort of use as your, you know, your preliminary, your first attempt at realizing subtle impermanence. So you take something like an easier example, and the easier example that they give is the last moment of a butter lamp that is about to go out. So do you all know what a butter lamp is? Laura doesn't know what a butter lamp is. So at least one person, yeah. Well, if you've been to Tibet or Dharamsala or, you know, places where Tibetans are found, when they like to make light offerings to the Buddha. Nowadays we use tea lights, yeah? So we can say a tea light, a candle light, candle about to go out. Oh, okay. But in Tibet, you know, they have these, and in big temples, they have the really large kind of, you know, containers like this. So they fill it with butter, and then you make a wick from cotton wool or something, and you stick it down in the hole in the middle. You see, then you light it. So that's a butter lamp. In Tibet, they didn't have kerosene. They didn't have, you know, olive oil. They didn't have much in the way of oil. You know, they had to use animal fat, just like in the Middle Ages. If you wanted a light in the Middle Ages in Britain, you had to usually they used you know, sheep fat, tallow. So it was like an animal fat you dip your rush or your, you know, into this animal fat, liquid animal fat, and then use that as a light. Of course, you had beeswax if you were, you know, a rich person. But not much of that in Tibet, you know, not many bees in sort of high altitude, kind of, you know, beehives. Anyway, so they often use butter. Anyway, you can just think of candle, the last moment of a candle about to go out. The butter lamp is a good one because usually they burn right down. You know, a candle can go out even though there's quite a lot of wax left. You know, the wax runs onto the table, or the wax runs and the wick of the candle is still a little bit left, and it just sort of falls over. But the butter lamp wick is better because it's fixed into the bottom of the cup. And so usually the butter lamp is able to burn down until all the fuel is gone. Yeah, so it's not so messy as a candle. But these tea lights that we are using here, they're similar, you know, because they've got the aluminium cup. And usually the most of the fuel is gone. So when the last moment of fuel is gone, then the butter lamp goes out, right? So that's the main point. So the last moment of this tea light or butter lamp that's about to go out. We're not talking about somebody blowing on it, not talking about wind, but let's just think of the fuel becoming exhausted. Okay, now? Yeah. So how long do they burn for? If you stay here about 4 hours, we'll be able to see it go out. Just have to be patient. So that's the kind of what we call the example, or the easy example, or similar example. Yeah. So first of all, we have to understand, yeah, that the effect follows the cause, right? The effect follows the cause. It's not like the cause and effect are at the same time. First, you have the cause, and then you have the effect following on, right? So that's you know, pretty sort of straightforward. And you know, you can see like the ceasing of the cause and the beginning of the effect are absolutely like joined to each other. They're not like that. It's not like the cause and the effect are ever simultaneous. If this is the cause of that, this one is first, it finishes, you know, the cause is used up its energy, and then the effect occurs. So you think like a seed and a sprout. Simple examples, yeah. First you have the seed, then it takes in water, it becomes, you know, warm in the springtime, and so then it starts to sprout. So the seed gives up its nature of being a sprout, and it becomes, the seed gives up its nature of being a seed, and then it becomes a sprout. So hard to draw the dividing line. Where is the seed ending and the sprout beginning? But in time, it is like that. First of all, the seed, then the seed, you know, deteriorates, disintegrates, and the sprout arises, one after the other. First you have the fuel, and then you have the fire, yeah? The fuel does its thing, and then you have fire. Okay, so it's one thing after the other. So that's first thing to remember. So we've got the last moment of fuel then, right? We've got right down to the last moment of fuel in this butter lamp. So what's going to happen next, yeah? The last moment of fuel, it is drawn up the wick. Somehow the heat of the fire, of the flame, it draws the fuel up, doesn't it? It draws the fuel up the wick. So the last minute drop of butter or kerosene or whatever wax is drawn up the wick, and then, you know, it reaches the hot zone, and whoo, you have fire. Yeah, it oxidizes. Basically, all these fuels that we're talking about that give fire like that are carbohydrates or hydrocarbons, some combination of hydrogen and carbon mainly, isn't it? And then the fire is like somehow they're oxidizing, so they're taking on oxygen. So you've got hydrocarbons, so it's some combination of hydrogen and carbon, and that splits apart. So the hydrogen takes on oxygen and becomes H2O. So that goes into the atmosphere as the water. And the carbon takes on oxygen and goes into the atmosphere as a gas, carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide. But at the same time, you get this release of energy, which can be released in terms of heat or a release in terms of light. And all it needs for that, you know, that kind of release to take place is you know, well, the main condition is, you know, the presence of oxygen and sort of, you know, the help of heat. There's got to be heat already there for the oxidation process to kick off. But when the oxidation process does kick off, it does release this energy, which is what we're looking for. That's the fire. That's the light. So that's basically what's happening. So I don't need any more detail on that. But the thing to notice, the thing we're interested in, is to see that. Okay, so the last moment of fuel gives rise to the last moment of flame, and then what happens? What happens next? It's the last
Smoke.
moment.
Smoke. The flame goes out, and then you have smoke.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in. Thank you, Laura. The flame goes out. Yes, there may be smoke. Probably will be smoke in a candle. But we're talking about the light. You said the last moment of the light. So that's the interesting thing. That the fuel's used up and you get light. But you can see the light immediately goes out. It's the last moment, right? So why does the flame go out?
There's no fuel remaining.
No.
Yeah, there's no fuel left. So you can see what's happening. There's, on the one hand, you've got the fuel has to give up its existence. The fuel has to give up it being fuel, and only in that way you can have flame. Yeah, the cause fuel has to cease, and then the effect flame begins. So the flame doesn't begin until the fuel has ceased. The ceasing of fuel is the beginning of the flame. They're simultaneously, the end of one is the beginning of the other. So the flame only begins when the fuel has ceased. But as soon as there is no more fuel, then the flame's got to go out. We all know that, no more fuel and no more flame. No more petrol in your car. And then, your car's going to stop. It's got to roll to a stop, isn't it? No more fuel, no more flame. So that's where you've got to focus on. See, that's the fascinating thing, that you don't get the flame until the fuel has ceased. You don't get the effect until the cause has ceased. But, as soon as the cause has ceased, then the effect ceases. So the effect arises. I'm not saying the effect ceases at the same time as it arises. No. There's a little bit of a gap, yeah? So the flame arises and then it ceases. It arises and immediately it's arisen, it goes out of existence. So that's, once you start thinking about that, that was when I realized that, that was kind of a new realization for me. That the cause gives rise to the effect, but as soon, and in giving rise to the effect, the cause ceases. But as soon as the cause ceases, then, in the next tiny moment, the effect's got to cease, no more fuel and no more flame. So that last moment of flame, how long is it? That's sort of infinitesimal, right? So if you read the verses, about this process, the verses in the front of the book, I do use this word infinitesimal. So this is like subtle impermanence. How short is that moment between the last moment of flame occurring and then ceasing? A very tiny moment, isn't it? If you switch the light off at the light switch, how long does it take for the light to go out? If you cut off the current, you stop the cause of the light, the electricity. How long does it take for the light to go out? It's not very long, is it? And for us, with ordinary human eyes, human senses, it's very difficult to say that first the light is switched off, the electricity stops, and then the light goes out. Very difficult to say there's a time gap, but there must be a time gap, because everything that is the action, every action takes a little bit of time. Every action has to have some duration. But you can see how small a moment we might be talking about. Okay, so that's the last moment of the butter lamp. But now you look back at the rest of the moments of the butter lamp, the ones that preceded the last moment. Aren't they all just the same? So every previous moment of every previous moment of flame also was just arising from a previous moment of fuel. So every moment of flame you've had for the whole life of the candle or of the butter lamp is coming from a new set of causes. It's coming a fresh drop of fuel going up the wick and combining with a fresh fresh oxygen molecules waiting in the air. So you can see that the flame is extremely momentary. If every moment of the flame has to come from a new moment of fuel, then that flame has got to be totally momentary, impermanent in this subtle sense. To us, it may look as if sometimes it's moving this way, sometimes it's moving that way, a little bit of wind, flickering. Yes, it does seem a pretty movable, changing thing, a flame. But if you add to that the understanding that, you know, every moment of fuel, every moment of flame has to come from a new moment of fuel and a new process of oxidation with new oxygen molecules, then you can really get the sense of, yes, the flame is momentary, you know, never staying the same, even for a tiny moment. And, you know, even if you take the tiniest moment you can think of, still you'll have change, you know, from the beginning of that moment until the end of that moment, there will have been change. So you can't say even a tiny moment it rests the same. From even a tiny moment, at the beginning of the moment to the end of the moment, something will have happened. So this is, you know, trying to get at momentariness using a slightly more easy example, which is the flame, and especially at the last moment of the flame. So that's really trying to prove that, that this momentary momentariness is the nature, at least of the flame, you know. So remember the reason, the official reason, merely by being produced, it's impermanent. So that's true of the last moment of the butter lamp, isn't it? You know, as soon as it's produced, it goes out. It doesn't need wind to come along and blow it out. It doesn't need water to come along and extinguish it with water. As soon as it's produced, it just goes out. It doesn't need any extra causes. It just goes out. The causes are used up, and so it goes out. It doesn't need any external extra cause to make it disintegrate and disappear. Merely by being caused, it goes out. Merely by arising, then the next thing it does is disappear. So that's really kind of, you know, trying to give you an insight into emptiness, into impermanence. Okay, now so the next thing to think about then is, what about these other phenomena like pots and sound? You know, are they do they follow the same pattern? So that's true of the flame. It's true of the last moment of the flame. It's true of all the earlier moments of the flame. Is it true of the pot?
I would say yes, it is. It's a slower process. It's a much slower process.
And the relationship between cause and effect is not as clear as with the flame example, because we can see what's the fuel that's causing the effect of the flame, whereas in a pot it's harder to kind of imagine, well, what's, you know, what is the cause really that has as an effect a pot. You know, it's sort of clay, somebody put it together, but like, I don't know, I think it's harder. It's harder to...
Yes, I agree. Yes, Thomas, did you say?
So they accept on the same as with the flame, so each moment of pot in the cause of the next moment of pot. So,
can you say that again, please?
So saying similar to the flame, so first moment of pot can be the cause of the second moment of pot.
Yes, but I think there is a difference between pot and flame, which we need to bring out. Yes, we should remember that just as the flame can be described in terms of moments, so also the pot can be described in the terms of moments, just as we in our lives can be described in terms of moments, yeah? The child of 4 years old gives rise to the child of 5 years old. The child of 5 years old gets a bit bigger and he changes into the child of 6 years old. So the pot is like that, you know, that one moment of pot is giving rise to the next moment of pot. And then the next moment of pot disintegrates and gives rise to the third moment of pot. So you should think of pot. I suggest, you know, to get the idea of impermanence, you start thinking even of pot in terms of, you know, moments, one moment succeeding another.
Yeah.
The point about pot, though, is that each moment looks pretty much the same as the other one. That's maybe what Jenny is kind of thinking or hinting at when she says it's a much slower process. I don't think it is a slower process, but you know, you can see what somebody means when they say that. The change isn't obvious. With the last moment of butter lamp, it's light to dark. So that's a very obvious change. Yeah? As soon as the last moment of the butter lamp is finished, then it goes out and you're left in the dark. So that's, you know, clearly a change. And when you think of the preceding moments of flame, you can still see that the flame is a pretty lively thing, you see, with lots of change going on. Even when there's no wind, you can see how the flame is like, you know, sort of very active thing. But what is the difference between the butter lamp and the pot that we haven't brought out yet? Anybody got any idea?
I mean, is it the? I mean, there's no difference in terms of speed, and in terms of the logic should be the same. But is there a difference in just our ability to understand it? Someone said it's more complex and harder to see. Because like another example I've been thinking about is the computer screen. You can have a complex picture on there, and as soon as you pull the power from the computer, obviously unless it has a battery, then it goes off instantly. But for each moment, you've had an image of the same, you know, just like the flame. But as soon as you pull the power from the computer screen, the image stops. But all those moments, there's been a constant surge of electricity, and then the screen's got, what is it, minerals or something in it, which makes the color. And it's kind of like a similar thing on your daily life. All these millions of causes are coming up rapid, constantly. And there's just, but I think it's the complexity of the pot, all these little atoms that I don't understand. But I can't imagine the Tibetans had this knowledge about atoms in the same way. So I don't understand how they understood pot to be as impermanent as the flame on that logic alone. So it would be good to know what you know, your advice on that, really.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think one difference you have to mention is that which I don't think is written in the text actually. But one thing that is different, and you know, alongside the flame, you can put sound. Sound is similar to flame in this respect, whereas something like seed and sprout or pot are slightly different. All impermanent, all thoroughly momentarily changing. But why is it a little bit easier to see that the flame or even sound is impermanent is because it's not the case that one moment of flame is like the substantial cause of the next moment of flame. If you think of the pot, or you think of your present body, you know, it's like one moment of pot is turning into the next moment of pot. Or a flower growing, you see, the first moment of the flower becomes the second moment of the flower. So the first moment of flower is like the substantial cause of the second moment of the flower. The substance of the first moment of the flower becomes the substance of the second moment of the flower with some slight changes. You know, or maybe they're revolutionary changes, and it's not just slight, you know. If you really go down to what these physicists are talking about, it's a total revolution. Like it's like the substance of the first moment of flower goes out of existence, and the substance of the second moment of flower arises. It's just like between seed and sprout. You see that the substance of the seed becomes the substance of the sprout, but still you can say the substance of the seed goes out of existence, and the substance of the sprout arises in its place from the substance of the seed. So that's the true of the pot as well, you see. So the first moment of the pot becomes the second moment of the pot, and the second moment of the pot becomes the third moment of pot. So there's revolutionary changes going on maybe, but still, if you look from, you know, our perspective, it's just like the first moment the pot has gone down and the second moment the pot has come up, but it's the same, it's the kind of same atoms are still there, you know? Same atoms, but of course the atoms are, you know, renewing themselves in every nanosecond or something, I don't know. But in sort of simpler terms, you know, the first moment of the pot becomes the second moment of the pot, and that becomes the third moment of the pot in turn. But with a flame, it's not like that, because it's not like the first moment of flame becomes the second moment of flame, and the second moment of flame becomes the third moment of flame. What is the substantial cause of the first moment of flame?
Fuel. But
the first moment of fuel, yes.
But Michelle, could I ask a question? I mean, maybe it's just about the time. I mean, if the flame goes out very quickly, but aren't there like really tiny milliseconds where there could be just, you know, that, let's say that moment, is it going like super quickly? So definitely it's just one only moment of the flame, or could it be some few moments of the flame?
Yeah, how long is a moment? That's not, I'm not putting a figure on that, you know.
Yeah.
You can say it's a continuous process without dividing into moments if you want to, but I'm dividing into moments in order to be able to talk about it.
Mm.
Is there some sort of mutual dependency in terms of the flame and the sound? Because with the flame, you need the fuel in terms of the substantial cause, and it's the same with the sound. You need the ear faculty in order, and the consciousness in order to hear the sound. So is it something to do with some sort of mutual dependency, like fuel and smoke and fire?
To make the second moment of sound, you need more air passing through your voice box, for instance, yeah? If you're talking about human sound of a voice, not talking about the ear, but what's producing the sound. The sound is being produced by your voice.
Right, yeah.
So for the second moment of sound, you need more air to come through your vocal cords. Yes, Laura?
I don't understand what you mean when you're saying the first moment of the pot and the second moment of the pot, because it makes sense when I think a pot being built, but a pot as in, or a cup like this one already here. What do you mean by first moment, second moment? I don't get it. Sorry.
Well, it's just that change is going on. Just like you have, if you think of something like a flower fading, the cut flower in the vase. So the first moment of the flower, it's like upright or something. But in the second moment, it's like that.
But a flower is an organic object, or like, whereas a pot is just like, it's not.
Yes. Okay. Soap bubble. Yeah. The first you think of when you blow a soap bubble, it's only going to last about 5 seconds. So there's changes going on in the soap bubble, aren't there? The liquid soap meets the air, so it starts to dry out or something. So it loses its capacity to remain, and then it pops. So the first moment of the soap bubble gives rise to the second moment of the soap bubble. The second moment of the soap bubble gives rise to the third moment of the soap bubble, and then by that time it's outside, it's too dry or something, and then pops. Yeah, so there's a change going on from moment to moment, and the first moment is lots of lather, lots of liquid or oil or something, so it's very, a bit stronger. Then it gets weaker and weaker and weaker, and then it pops. So each moment of the soap bubble is giving rise to the next moment until the end of the series. And the pot is just like that. That's the theory. That's what we're trying to push to you. But the pot is like that. It's just a series of moments. Just like a human life, when you're just like the organic thing. But it's not that the change is slower, but it's just harder to detect by our crude senses, because the changes, when they've happened, it still looks very much like the moment before, but some tiny changes happen. And that's where we talk about the moments even of a pot. But the difference is, you see, where do you get the first moment of flame from? You get it from the first moment of fuel. It's the fuel that turns into the flame, or it's the fuel that gives rise to the flame. If you want a second moment of flame, you need a second moment of fuel. So the second moment of flame isn't sort of the substantial kind of effect of the first moment of flame. The second moment of the flame is a substantial effect of the second moment of fuel. So each time it's easier to see that, oh, there's a new moment of flame, so it needs a new moment of cause. Because, you know, it's not like one moment of flame is giving rise to another moment of flame, giving rise to another moment of flame, like the pot. But it's like the fuel is giving rise to one moment of flame, and then another moment of fuel has to give rise to another moment of flame. So it's easy to see the impermanence of it. And the sounds is the same, the sound of the human voice. If you want to give a long sound like ah, each moment of sound has got to come from another moment of breath, another moment of wind coming through your throat with your vocal cords, like, you know, vibrating. It's not like the first moment of sound is the cause or is the substantial cause of the second moment of sound. And the second moment of sound isn't the substantial cause of the third moment of sound. Each moment of sound is the substantial cause is, you know, from here, from your voice. We're talking about, you know, the sound of the voice. So again, it's a bit easier to see the subtle impermanence of sound than it is of something like a pot. But we're arguing the pot is exactly the same in the end. Yes, Jason, was it you?
Yeah. So the substantial cause then of the next moment and so on is like, might be, I think we've spoken about this before, but a smoke ring. If someone makes a smoke ring, like all these vapes you see these days, and they make a smoke ring, you're saying pot is like that. These main causes come together, produce it, then it kind of just is there changing until it fades away. Because if we left pot long enough, it would also decay like everything else in the world. It would start to get brittle, come apart, and so on. It's kind of like that then. It's kind of produced like it's like the flame, really. If we were to go in micro moments, the same thing's happening with the flame. It's just the way we're looking at pot, almost because we exist in a similar time frame as it. If we live just as long as the little flame, you know, then we might see it like the pot, maybe. But because we don't, you know. So is it like that then? All these main causes come together and make the pot, and like a smoke ring, it's kind of there until it fades out.
I like the smoke ring, yeah. The pot on your table is just like a smoke ring, yeah? Just think that when you're wondering about your pot on your table tonight. Just remember Jason suggested it's just like a smoke ring that you blow when you're vaping.
It's all right example, isn't it?
Yeah, it's brilliant. I like it, I tell you. So you have to think about that, you know, so you've got to make the transition then from something like flame to something like a pot, or something like sound to something like a pot. So that's where the debater will argue with you, see. He'll say, oh yeah, we accept this, that the flames are momentarily changing. We accept that sound is momentarily changing. If you want a series of moments of sound, you have to have a series of moments of new causes. We can see that, you know, we can understand that. Or your mind, you look at your mind, it's changing all the time, you know, so it's not difficult to see your mind is like, really like, you know, never the same for even a tiny second. So that's another one where, you know, the impermanence is a bit easier to think about maybe. Your mind is very movable, you know, changeable. But then somebody can say, oh yes, that's true of the flame, but if you do something like mixing blue and yellow paint, when you're a painter, you mix blue paint and yellow paint, and what do you get? Green paint. But the green paint doesn't just disappear as soon as you've made it. The green paint stays around. Maybe it stays around for years. You paint some green paint on your wall and it lasts for quite a long time. So that's different, you know. But how different is it really, you know? You think, why does the flame go out? Why does the flame go out? And the only reason you can give, and we're not talking about wind blowing it or anything like that, the only reason we can give is, well, there's no more fuel. So as soon as the causes are exhausted, the effect arises, but the effect is immediately exhausted as soon as it arises and it disappears. So if that's true of the flame, why isn't it true of the green paint also? And you say, oh, well, they're different. But how are they different, you know? He'll say, well, you say to him, well, why doesn't the flame last for years like the green paint? There's no more fuel. But why doesn't the flame go on existing like the green paint? Oh, it can't do that, you know. Flames can't last for years without any fuel. And why not? And the only reason is, if there's no more cause, there's no more fuel, then you can't have the effect. The effect just dies away immediately. You know, so if that's the only reason you can give, well, then it must be true of the green paint as well. As soon as the cause is, you know, as soon as the cause is exhausted, the effect must go out of existence. But in the case of green paint, the second moment of green paint arises. It looks very much like the first moment. And then that immediately dies away. As soon as the causes of the first moment of the second moment of green paint are exhausted, you know, the second moment of green paint arises, but it's just like the flame. It immediately goes out of existence. But it gives rise to the third moment of green paint, which looks very much like the second moment. It's different, you know, it's been revolutionary change, very rapid change, but it just looks like the moment before. And so you assume it's the same. But the same process of rapid, subtle impermanence is going on. That's our argument, you see. So you have to kind of work that out and see if it's convincing to you. And what reason do you give for the green paint being different from the flame? It's very hard to give one. So then in the end, you have to accept that the green paint is just like the flame. It's just like the rapid, you know, change and revolutionary change in every moment isn't just so visible to your weak eyes, but it's still going on. So that's how the Tibetans and the Buddhists are thinking. They're not using microscopes and you know, kind of whatever they use, these astrophysicists or microphysicists or whatever they are. They didn't have any of those instruments. You know, they're just using reasoning. And that's the kind of reasoning they were using, I think.
And is there another thought on there, just quickly, that another way of kind of trying to get at the things that are changing moment by moment, even though they appear solid. So like a metal fork that we used to eat with, you know, if you put it, it's cold, isn't it, the majority of the time, but if you put it in your hands, it warms up quite quick. And then it becomes like it becomes a warm fork then. So that's showing that it's changing moment by moment, isn't it? And then you put in some new sets of causes around it, which then produces essentially what is a new fork, but it's warmer than the fork before.
Yeah, if you say the fork is permanent while it's stuck in the kitchen and nobody's using it, it's not getting hot or cold because it's just put away somewhere where it is not being disturbed, then if you say then it becomes permanent at that point, you know, it doesn't change. It has this sort of a way of just being static, unmoving. So once it goes into this state of permanence, how does it become impermanent again? It is in a state of permanence, Buddhist sense of impermanence, you know, the Buddhist sense of permanence, static. So once it becomes static, Jason, how would it ever change? How would something that doesn't change ever change? If it's got the nature of not changing, how will it change? So even if you hit it with a big hammer, you know, or threw it into the furnace where they melt steel down, if it was a fork that didn't change, it wouldn't melt because it never changes. It doesn't change. That's its nature. So if something, a last thought to leave you with for this evening, if something changes, it has to change all the time. Because if it goes into a state of not changing, how does it ever change again? Oh, well, you know, some special cause comes along and makes it change. You know, like you hit it with a big hammer. Yeah, but if it's got a nature of not changing, even if you did hit it with a big hammer, it wouldn't change. And then if you read this book, you know, the idea is that the leopardess in the book, actually, not a leopard, a female leopard, a leopardess. The leopardess cannot change her spots. And if it's permanent, okay, you can go out of existence. I'm not saying it lasts forever. Static, yeah, static phenomena doesn't change. Okay, so it's like there'd be the leopard who can't change her spots. Okay, she can die, but she can't change her spots. So if it's permanent, if it's in a state of non-change, it never could change. So that's suggesting then that these things that are compounder phenomena, that they're always in a state of change. They're always in a state of passing away from one state to another. And these moments like, oh, it's jerky. No, it's just a smooth process of everything is constantly falling away from what it is. You know, so if you can get a good feeling for that, a good, really good sort of, you know, sense of that, then your understanding of emptiness will become a bit easier. So that's the time to stop there. I've probably given you a few ideas. Maybe I haven't spoken very clearly, I'm sorry. But we should have the final prayers. See you tomorrow, you know, 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock UK time, 11 o'clock here in Slovakia. But we've just got a few prayers to finish off with. End of session prayers. If you can find those, final Lam-Rim prayer. Oops. So there's the final Lam-Rim prayer, and then there is the long life prayers of His Holiness. And then after that, we'll do the long life prayer for Lama Zopa Rinpoche, since we are on FBMT territory here. So let's go for that too. So final Lam-Rim prayer. Through what I have gathered by long efforts here, long efforts here of two collections of space, may I become appointed congruent, whose wisdom I is in my ignorance, until such time mind you in all lives, let me find the best of graduated teachings all complete of conquest by achieving it, as on my love's compelling parents instinct the path essentials as they are, expunging darkness from my greatest mind. The Congress teachings may I where these most precious teachings of the best have not yet spread, or once spread have declined. With great compassion lifting up the heart, let me reveal His treasure of delight, made to the stages of enlightening path, attain the sons and conquest wondrous aid, bring freedom seekers minds to glory, and the Congress actions from perpetuate, with right conditions found for following the gentle path and the the humans and non-humans for all rights, not far from that pure path the conquest space, when anyone endeavors to perform the best of vehicles tenfold may those Almighty always lend and oceans of good fortune all their days. Step shining straight Geshe Tenzin I pray to you, matchless kind one tenzin yatso, effortlessly your entertain. Jitendam Padang Ejure Sambaishino Kandin Sunmeten Yatsu Lasa Wadapsu Tujel Tutsu Jan Xing Jan Geng Yao Den Xing Yong Gao Wei Gen Zi Dao Ba Zi Jiao Song Kor Wei Le Men Tu Ba Na So Du Jie Yun Du San Ne Shu. Okay, thank you, guys, ladies, gentlemen. Hope you can join tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. See you
Thanks,
tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you, Geshe.
Very much.
Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Geshe Losel. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye then.
Bye.